During the life cycle, would you imagine that you would be focusing on different type of business processes from a digitalization perspective, meaning starting with forecast exchange to start off with your CMOs, then maybe at some point go to your big four P2P transactions versus at a point where you are sharing net requirements. So, how does that evolve? If you can give some insights on that, that would be super in terms of a clinical phase organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you're starting from, right? So, I mean, again, it comes down to, clinical phase. Maybe if you want to put it in the supply chain maturity model, whatever you want to call it, maybe you're phase 1, 2, you're going from essentially nothing to internal alignment. So, when you're doing that and you're trying to align internally, both with finance, with the clinical group, with the internal tech ops organization, manufacturing and or external supply, however you want to look at it, you're really at this point where you need to align internally. That's the first phase, because really when you're in maturity model 1, it's everything is separate. Nothing is kept in one place. You don't necessarily everything, but maybe it's not memorialized on any documentation, and you don't have it where you can refer back to it, and you can actually share that with others. So as you start to transition into more of a mature organization, right, you're aligning internally, and the processes themselves mature with that. So you're going to have an SOP early on for a business process. Maybe it's a work instruction that's going to say, listen, you go into Excel, you do 1, 2, and 3. What's going to happen is, as you start moving into a phase 2 organization, that internal alignment, maybe you're starting on an S&OP process, right? So sales and operation planning.
Mm.
Maybe you're starting on demand reviews. Maybe you're working on supply reviews. You're getting that internal alignment. As you start to move really towards the phase 3, you're looking more towards being able to provide those forecasts externally. How do you provide them? That's really up to the organizations. So whether you're doing it via EDI and you're transacting it, but keep in mind you're gonna get into a situation where you have to evolve, because the contracts that you're signing mean that you have to evolve. So you're going to have a situation where you're going to come into the window of binding, right? So you're going to have binding forecasts to your suppliers. You're going to have to provide a binding and unbinding forecast for, maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 4 years. It depends on what the specific terms are, but you're going to have to be able to tell them and bind yourself financially to it. And when you start doing that, the processes evolve very quickly, right? Because you're now on the hook. You have to set that money aside, and you have to be able to pay your suppliers for what you're saying you are asking them to do. So the processes themselves start to evolve with it. So in a way, if you're working with fairly mature CMOs and more commercial CMOs, you're starting to get that maturity from them, and you're
Mhm.
starting to understand what you need to do, and how you choose to do it is up to you internally. So whether or not you choose to continue to use Excel, whether or not you choose to send it via EDI, right? If you don't necessarily have an ERP system, maybe you're not sending it via EDI. Maybe it has to be through Excel, unless there's another solution. But you're going back through and you're double checking the numbers that you have against your budget. You're checking them against your demand and what your demand is. Clinical, your demand is pretty flat, right? So you know how many patients you're going to enroll, the general timeline you're going to enroll them, phase 1, 2, and then into phase 3. You have these plans up front so you can start to build for them. If you're talking about your actual supply chain length, right? So how long is your supply chain? If your supply chain is 6 months long from, linearly speaking, if you're 6 months, okay, then I need to know 6 months ahead of time. Maybe my binding window is a year. So all of a sudden I need a year's worth of binding. I can generally understand what that is, right? Because it's flat. You're not enrolling additional patients. They're not taking more unless there's escalations involved, and you already have those planned out. So you know when that's going to happen. if you're in a commercial organization, if you're in a generic organization, branded is pretty flat. You can see the curve relatively easily, like how you build when you get to maturity, and then kind of what the drop off is. Very rarely are you surprised based on the market research that you've already done. When you're in generics, it's quite different, right? So again, it's commoditized. You have forecasts that go up and down. You're constantly trying to chase them. So I mean, I think again, as you're working through in clinical phase, you're really allowing yourself the space to build these processes to run along with the systems that you're using. Because again, if you're gonna bring in a new system, you need to have the processes behind it, right? So you're going to need to have that formalized process. You're going to need to know what your KPIs are, because you're going to be held accountable for them. It's very different when you're in a small organization. Maybe it's an R&D organization, and you don't have that, right? You just need to know, did I get the batch that I asked for, and
Correct.
is it before I needed it? Those are the things that you're looking for, right?